Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber. You're listening to AMAC's podcast, Better for America. Now, today we have a very special and important episode, and our guest today will address your questions on the war between Israel and Hamas. Joining us today are two very distinguished guests, Joel Rayburn and Robert Nicholson. Now, Joel Rayburn is a retired U.S. Army officer, former diplomat, and historian. He has served as Special Advisor for Middle East Affairs as recent as 2021. And during his career of more than 3 decades, he served in many roles related to the Middle East, including Special Envoy and Assistant Secretary of Levant Affairs. We also have with us today Robert Nicholson. He is the President and Executive Director of the Philos Project, a nonprofit organization and community who promotes positive Christian engagement in Near Eastern cultures. He is the co-founder and board member of Passages Israel. Their mission is to offer Christian students an experience that exposes them to the complex realities of modern Israel and the Middle East. He is also an advisory board member of In Defense of Christians, which advocates for the protection and preservation of Christianity and Christians in the Middle East. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for joining me today to share your insights. I know our AMAC members will be very appreciative to hear all that you have to say today. So thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Joel, thank you. I'm going to start with you, Joel. I know it's so hard really to know where to start. So I'd like to first talk a little bit of history. Now, most Arab nations deny the right for Israel to exist. Now, this goes back to 1948, when the UN declared Israel as a sovereign nation. Joel, could you take us back to 1948 and just paint us a picture of sort of the state where Israel was at in 48?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be with you today, Rebecca. It's a really sad, tragic week, and I'm afraid that it's going to get worse before it gets better. From 1948, when the state of Israel was created, it was immediately attacked by its 5 Arab neighbors and had to fight its first really war of independence in 1948. And there began a cycle of Arab-Israeli wars that continued really until 2006. Was the latest explosion of it when Israel fought a war against Lebanese Hezbollah at that time. There have been the Arab countries' rejectionist stance of Israel and its right to exist has been tempered a little bit over the decades. For example, in 2002, Saudi Arabia proposed that there could be an Arab-Israeli peace agreement along the lines of the borders that Israel held in 1967, right before the Six-Day War, which was a preemptive war that Israel launched against Egypt and Syria and Jordan at that time in order to forestall what was obviously going to be another multi-country Arab onslaught. But so now we're down to the point where really the main rejectionist elements against Israel aren't its Arab neighbors so much as the Iranian regime and its main militant proxy groups, Lebanese Hezbollah and Hamas. And so that's the war that Israel is fighting right now.
Thank you, Joel. Robert, fast forward to the Six-Day War, which, Joel, you've mentioned, that took place June 5th through the 10th, 1967. Explain how this marked the start of sort of a new phase in the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians.
Sure. Thanks again for having us. That war changed the region in extending Israel's control over territories that until then it did not control. So the Sinai Peninsula, a big, huge piece of land between Israel and Egypt. Also the Golan Heights, a higher piece of land, a mountainous piece of land that separated Israel and Syria, as well as the West Bank, or as Jews call it, Judea and Samaria, kind of the biblical heartland, and the region that is aflame right now, the Gaza Strip. Up until that point, Israel was smaller. After that war, after the 6 days, they controlled those territories, and the big question, of course, is what do they do with them? Do they use them as bargaining chips for peace with the Arab states? That was Israel's view, and to some extent still remains the view. Or do you hold them indefinitely, which for lack of peace has been what's actually happened. So what we're seeing in Gaza, to some extent, does go back to what happened in 1967 and this open question of, okay, there's 2 million Palestinians living there. Who should control them and under what authority? And ever since then, there has been this always latent, sometimes very explosive tension, this war between Hamas, which controls that territory, and the state of Israel.
Thank you. It is such a sad time in history. We were all so shocked and horrified when we did see Hamas's recent barbaric attack on Israel. And we saw, paragliders with machine gunners, drones with bombs. Hamas bulldozed through the border and began murdering innocent men, women, and children. Joel, much has been written about how the Israeli government was caught unprepared for the attack. What is your take on how this happened? Was this a staggering failure of Israeli intelligence?
I talked to an Israeli friend of mine who's been involved in national security affairs, and he pointed out something that I think rang true to me. He said it wasn't a failure of intelligence; it was a failure of imagination. The data points were there. The idea that the Iranian regime and Hamas, with Hezbollah support, might have the ambition of doing something like what happened on the 7th was there, but it was an assumption within the Israeli national security community that they wouldn't dare do it, that they would be deterred from taking that kind of step, from upending the rules of engagement, the rules of the game as they had existed, and also that the Iranian regime wouldn't be interested in overturning the rules of the game as they existed, because that would imply a further escalation of the conflict from a cold conflict to a hot conflict between Israel and the Iranian regime, and that's why they were, in addition to it being the high holidays and having gone through the high holidays and then assuming that they were in sort of a lull period.
And how exactly, in your view, what is their ultimate goal? Hamas, that is, their ultimate goal.
Well, Hamas, I think, first of all, I don't think Hamas makes independent strategy decisions or has independent aims of its own, independent of Tehran. I think it's the supreme leader and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran that strategically direct Hamas, Hezbollah, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, as well as a lot of other militant groups around the region, insofar as they have aims that would be within the boundaries that the Iranian regime was set for them. I think Hamas was looking to seize control of the entire Palestinian movement and ultimately to be the sole authority, political authority, and governance authority in the Palestinian territories. They can see that over in the West Bank that the Palestinian Authority is headed by Abu Mazen, who's 87 years old, and he's not going to be around too much longer, and there's no clear political succession to him. So this is an opportune time for them, I think, to become ascendant within the Palestinian scene. And once they control that, then they have a permanent veto over initiatives that would lead to a peace settlement or a two-state solution. That's something that Hamas doesn't want. They're absolutists, they're rejectionists, maximalists, and with Abu Mazen out of the way and having taken the heroic action that they did the other day, they stand to inherit, I think they believe, sole leadership of the Palestinian cause.
Robert, I want to turn to you. I see so many and folks that forward to me social media posts where people are blaming Zionism. Where does Zionism come from, and why are pro-Palestinians blaming Zionists for what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank?
Well, the word Zionism is one of the most offensive words in the English language, and it's very important to ask the question you're asking and try to figure out, what do people mean by Zionism? Zionism, I usually define as a movement for Jewish self-determination in the Jewish homeland. Very basic. Started in 1880, people being persecuted in Europe started to leave Europe in small numbers and move and buy property in the historic land of Israel. It is also called Palestine, kind of regionally in the same way we call New England, New England. There was not a state of Palestine. It was the Ottoman Empire. 40 years later or so, when the British defeated the Ottomans in World War I, they did something that changed the game forever. And they, as a matter of policy, agreed to support Jews who wanted to make that move and come back to their homeland. Zionism is, on one hand, very pragmatic. It is a response to persecution of Jews. I mean, it's historically how it started, specifically in the Christian lands of Europe, I'm sad to say, as a Christian. And it was content. Its leaders were content for the most part to accept any size-shaped state, Jewish state, in the land of Israel that they could get. They received that from the United Nations in a United Nations General Assembly vote, and they proceeded to declare independence within that land that was allotted by the United Nations. Now, of course, I'd be lying if I said there was not something deeper than that for Jews within Judaism, and that is the historic longing for Jerusalem, right? Every day, 3 times a day, for almost 2,000 years, Jews in every part of the world, wherever they're living, pray to God to bring them back to Zion. This has been going on for a very long time. And so when Jews in Europe were being persecuted and ideas of nationalism were then, percolating inside Europe, these things all came together and led people to establish the Zionist movement, which was, let's get back to where we started. Let's be safe, protect ourselves from these people who want to persecute us, and let's try to rebuild a Jewish society that we haven't had since, the Romans kicked us out.
Robert, you've spent so much time in Israel and you know families who live there. Can you tell us a little bit about what you are hearing from families who are there now?
Oh, wow. I'm hearing a lot. We do spend a lot of time on the ground. Both organizations that you mentioned at the outset, Philos and Passages. Sadly, one of our speakers for Passages, he spoke to many of our groups, Christian college student groups, Amit, was killed. He was living down near the border, and on Saturday, when all these people came over the border, he tried to fight back, and he was killed tragically. Another one of our guides was away camping in the desert with some friends. His son was home alone in a small village called Kfar Aza. Thank God they had a steel door installed at some point in recent years, and the terrorists were too eager to kill to bother to try to break that door in. They just moved on to the next one. But this poor kid sat for 10 hours inside his house, hearing his neighbors butchered, getting text messages from a friend of his who was at first alive on the beach fishing, seeing Hamas boats come up to the shore, and then wasn't responding after those Hamas people killed him. His body was later found. I mean, all kinds of things. And that's just the victims. And on the other side, you have the soldiers. So we do a lot of work with the Christian community inside Israel. We do a lot of work specifically in helping Christians, even those coming from the Arabic-speaking side of society, who want to join the IDF, to join the IDF. We have a program specifically for that. And so these kids who've been, training for, months and years are now in uniform on the front line, Christians fighting for a Jewish state besides Bedouin and Druze and of course Jews as well. And their families are just beside themselves as these kids get ready to go into Gaza. I mean, to go into Gaza is like, to an Israeli ear, that's, it's like going into Fallujah or Mosul. So there is, the psychological stress on the people of Israel, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, otherwise, is just too immense for those of us who haven't been in that kind of situation to even comprehend. It's the most dramatic, traumatic experience that I've seen the people of Israel go through in the years that I've been alive. And that's, I think, even including to some extent the Second Intifada.
Joel, can you speak to the current situation for the civilians who are in Gaza and the West Bank who may not be able to get out? Is Israel preventing them from getting out? Is Hamas preventing them from getting out? Are they just too afraid to get out of the way? What can you tell us? What do you know?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with it's not in Hamas's operating mode is to locate themselves within civilian areas. They'll have their headquarters in hospitals. They'll position troops and rockets and missiles in residential homes and in schools and mosques and so on. And I think for them, they've always used the population of Gaza as a human shield, 2 million human shields. And so Hamas obviously doesn't have an interest in seeing the large scale evacuation of the civilians because that'll leave them more vulnerable to precise Israeli targeting. On the other hand, I think a lot of the people in Gaza are afraid to move. I mean, they're now in a dramatic war zone. They're sort of cut off from news and having a hard time staying connected to the world anyway. So I think a lot of those people are frightened with what's happening around them. But for sure, Hamas doesn't have an interest in Hamas doesn't have an interest in seeing their human shields just drive away, and then they're left to fend for themselves in front of the Israeli army and air force.
So, Joel, does the supreme leader of Iran want dead Jews, dead Palestinians, or both?
I think both. I think both. The supreme leader of Iran, I think, is responsible for most of the havoc that's being wreaked in the Middle East now and for the last decade plus. I saw that firsthand in Iraq, for example. And Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, is someone who really believes that he has a personal mission to try to neutralize Israel permanently. He's old. He's 85. He knows he's not going to be around much longer. I think he's an old man in a hurry. I think he would like to see Israel checkmated by an existential threat from the north, from his Hezbollah that his IRGC controls, and an existential threat from the Gaza Strip that his IRGC again controls. And he would like to see that in his lifetime. That's what I suspect, because he's been accepting more risk in deploying the IRGC and using his militant proxies. And I also think that he sized up Israel's political situation right now and concluded that Israel is too divided to mount a proper response. And I think he sized up the U.S. administration and concluded that the U.S., especially after, for example, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, is looking weak and on the back foot and willing to recoil in the face of aggression. And so I think he thought now's the time to try to take advantage of this weakness. And that's why he pulled the trigger on having Hamas do what it did the other day.
Thank you very much, Robert. We've seen the Biden administration officials. They came out and urged both sides to refrain from violence and retaliatory attacks. And then we heard Joe Biden recently say that there was no evidence that Iran is involved. Where do you see this conflict going from here? And what should our leadership here in the United States be doing?
Our leadership here in the United States should be standing 100% unequivocally behind the people of Israel as they seek to destroy Hamas in its base, and that's going to be hard to do because it's a difficult fight. I pity anyone who's making decisions on how to prosecute that fight. We are going to see, no doubt, civilian casualties. We'll see many soldiers dead. Images that only compound the shock that we all felt last week. But this is a fight that's right to fight. And I think we as the United States need to be committed. I think President Biden deserves some credit for being very strong in his initial words to the world. Of course, speaking specifically to Iran and other backers of Hamas. He said something to the effect of, if you're thinking about getting into this fight and making things worse, don't. And then he moved, as far as I know, 2 carriers into the vicinity just to make that point. I think that's the right thing to do. I think more of that is important. God willing, that northern front with Hezbollah won't open up. It could pull the U.S. in a way that we don't want to be. But as Joel was saying, this is not just about Gaza. It's not just about the civilians of Gaza, or to some extent, even the people of Israel. This is a larger chessboard This is part of one front of Iran's grand strategy. And if the United States cares at all about its friends in the region, about the people there who share our values, our vision of the world, then this is something that we have to stay involved in. And we have the capacity to do so. And thank God, right now, the American people are with us.
Joel, if you were advising President Trump today, what would be the top 3 actions that you would advise him to take?
Well, I think the first thing, and I would even advise this is President Biden, because it's that immediate. It was a good thing for Secretary of Defense Austin to move the additional carrier strike groups, as Robert mentioned, into the Eastern Mediterranean. That's a military move that's designed to try to deter the Iranian regime from opening up a northern front with Israel in order to try to save Hamas by making Israel have to divide its resources between two fronts. But the deterrent message of that military move is undermined if the Biden administration doesn't follow through with all the non-military policies that it's got towards Iran and its proxies right now. The United States right now is not enforcing sanctions on Iranian oil sales. They released funds in exchange for hostages, as we noted. They released $10 billion. They allowed the Iraqi government to pay back $10 billion that was owed to the Iranian regime in dollars this past summer. So all of the non-military messaging, and at the same time, it seems like Biden administration officials have wanted to run interference for the Iranian regime, as though the Iranian regime was not connected to what just happened on October 7th. So as long as that's the case and there's a mixed message, then I don't think the military deterrent is going to dissuade the supreme leader from trying to save Hamas by opening up a northern front. I expect that that's what the Iranian regime is going to do. And already you see that the tensions and the cross-border airstrikes and missile attacks and so on between Israel and Hezbollah are heating up. And I think that's the next phase of where the Iranians want to take this conflict, and they're moving toward doing that. So if I were advising President Trump, I would say double down, have not just military moves to try to deter the Iranian regime, but return to that economic pressure policy, isolate them politically, and expose. Don't run interference and try to cover for the Iranian role or dismiss it. Declassify the intelligence that shows the longstanding relationship between Tehran and Hamas, as well as Islamic Jihad and some of these other crazies that have been mounting terror attacks in the West Bank and Gaza and so on. So across the board, be uniform. Use all your elements of national power: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. And then I think you could get the Iranian regime to back down.
Robert, Prime Minister Netanyahu has created a wartime cabinet to oversee this fight. What do you think are the most important actions that the Prime Minister can take to end the conflict as quickly as possible? And then what do you think the political future looks like for Netanyahu? I mean, he's made peace before with Arab nations, and he's long kept Israel safe. How does this war impact really his brand, for lack of a better word?
Well, it's a great question, one that no doubt will be debated quite a bit as the weeks go on. I think the most important thing for him to do right now is to prosecute this fight, as Joel said, to carry through, using the moment to widen and deepen his global alliances with us and others as much as possible. There is a lot of advantage in the moral clarity that was provided by Hamas in the actions that it did. This is not one of those situations that it's hard to tell who started it and are the actions of Israel justified? Most leaders around the world are behind Israel, and I think capitalizing on that moment, bringing together a much stronger and tighter coalition of allies is really key, and Netanyahu's quite good at that. I think beyond that, the most important thing for his people is unifying them. The question you're asking has within it the recollection of the last 9 months when the Israeli people have been divided, more than I've seen them in my lifetime, over internal politics, things we don't have to get into here. But I think This moment requires real leadership. I think he needs to rise above all that. He's trying. I think he should do even more, and should use this moment as much as possible to unite these different factions inside the country. His political future, uncertain. No doubt the intelligence failure will haunt him. He is very good at resurrection, so I don't ever put anything past Bibi. He is a smart guy. He's not a wartime prime minister for the most part. He's handled small conflicts. This is very much new for him. I think people are waiting to see how he steps up. But this, no doubt, harms him and his legacy in a very big way. What he needs to do now to recover it is make sure that he wins.
You know, Robert, as the world is watching, many pro-Palestinians believe that Israel discriminates against them in concrete ways. Groups like Black Lives Matter and others label Israel as a human rights abuser. What argument supports that narrative?
What argument supports the fact that Israel's to blame for this?
Correct. Is there an argument that supports that?
I don't think there's an argument at all, but I can try to channel them here a bit. I think part of it goes back to what we were saying earlier, and that is a misunderstanding, fundamental misunderstanding about Zionism. So the other way to define Zionism is a Western imperial colonial movement that takes on this veneer of liberating the Jewish people, of protecting the Jewish people, but is in fact just another example of Western imperial activity that comes at the expense of people of color, right? This is a very intersectional way to talk about it, right? The Jews, even if they belong there, they came, they were gone for almost 2,000 years, and they came back riding on the backs of, Great Britain, and everything that they've done ever since then is just fruit of the poisonous tree. I think they would also throw in the fact that they believe Israel has not done enough for peace. Of course, that neglects the peace deals that were offered in the 1930s, in the 1940s, and in the 1990s, and the early 2000s, right? There have been multiple peace deals, some of them actually completed, such as the one with Egypt, Jordan, some others. But these people believe that the Palestinians who did what they did on Saturday were somehow justified because they had no other outlet. Israel is suppressing peaceful attempts at self-determination. And so these Palestinians, these people would say, had no alternative but to, punch through the fence and start massacring women and babies, right? Now, I think a lot of the people in that movement are ignorant, maybe most. I'm sure there is a small group of malicious people who are running these movements. I think a lot of people, especially on college campuses, just get swept up in whatever's happening on the Quad, Free Palestine. It seems like the right thing to do. Maybe they haven't even seen the images, or at least heard the stories that we all have heard. So I think there's an educational aspect to this, but I also think there's a certain amount of naming and shaming for those people acting in bad faith, spreading false narratives, just blatant misinformation. I do think that good people should consider taking on those people who are leading others astray, because that is not good for not only Israel, but even for the U.S. to see these people marching through the streets celebrating the acts that we saw is a little bit unsettling, I have to say, for me and I think lots of others.
Thank you, Robert. Joel, is there any time where this war may have been avoided?
Well, I don't think that the war, as I said before, I don't think Hamas takes independent decisions. I think that the attack on Israel was enabled by, probably strategically directed by, the Iranian regime. I don't think that it's a manifestation of Palestinian popular anger at Israel, which is there. I mean, to be honest, I mean, certainly. I mean, the posture that Israel has had to adopt to try to nullify terrorist threats against Israeli security has resulted in a pretty heavy security regime that normal Palestinians have to live with day in and day out. No one wants to live that way, and I don't think the vast majority of Israelis want to have that kind of posture. But no one's come up with a better approach so far. And again, as long as the Iranian regime is spending billions and deploying its own military forces to assist these militant groups that spoil, it seems like, every pragmatic step toward peace on both sides, then I don't see any panacea out there. It's not good for Palestinians. It's not good for Israelis to continue on with indefinite war, an indefinite state of conflict. So there has to be some other kind of arrangement. But I think the Iranian regime has to be moved out of the way first.
Thank you for that perspective, Joel. I do have a final question for both Joel and Robert. I guess, Robert, you can go first. Assuming Israel is successful in eradicating Hamas forever, could Gaza be peaceful? And then in follow-up to that question, I'm curious, because we have many faithful Christians that are listening, do you believe in the prophecy that's spelled out in Ezekiel 38?
Wow. Okay. Well, I would say if Israel destroys Hamas, can peace come to Gaza? That is a very important question. One of the complicating factors here is that the Palestinian people, for reasons we've already talked about, are themselves, apart from the government of Hamas and the leaders in Tehran, not exactly interested in a peaceful settlement with Israel right now. In the past, there have been majorities that have wanted peaceful negotiations, a two-state solution. Right now, those numbers are very low, and most people are against the two-state solution than for. 67% of Palestinians, just regular people in the West Bank and Gaza, as of a poll done September 13th, believe that armed violence against civilians inside Israel is not only permissible, but something to be supported, right? So when you have 2/3 of the population who more or less buys into the ideology of Hamas, taking away Hamas solves part of the problem, but what then do those people do? I think Arab leadership, Muslim leadership is key here. I think Israel's Arab allies, America's Arab allies need to step up and take a more outsized role. Even if the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank comes back to Gaza, they were chased out in 2007, even if they come back, because, as Joel said, the president there, Abu Mazen, is so old, so unliked, it's not exactly clear that they can achieve peace. It's truly like a catch-22. I don't have a great answer for that. As far as Ezekiel and prophecies, I, as a Christian, have no qualms about saying that I believe that the Jewish people were, and will be the vehicle of God's revelation on earth. A lot of people debate what that means. What is, Catholics, Protestants, how far does that go? How much remains? I'm not a theologian, and those questions are interesting, but not the most important. What I do think is important is that Christians need to understand there is a historical, cultural, theological, almost genetic in terms of civilization connection between Christians and Jews that makes them relevant for what we believe. It's not important, and I urge people never to get too deeply into these fights about what is the big plan of the universe. The most important thing is to understand that they are connected to us. And for that reason, we have just as much of an obligation to the Jewish people as we do to Christian people. And I urge people to not only think that, but to act on it. That's the most important part.
Thank you so much, Robert. Joel, final thoughts.
Well, I think I know many good Israelis. I know many good Palestinians. I know many good people from the Arab countries, and I think that there's been a failure of leadership so far on many sides that has stood in the way. And the polls do reflect what Robert said. I take polling in the Arab world with a grain of salt because I don't, Arab societies I think are conditioned over the last 100 years not to say in public what they say to one another privately, and so I think the Palestinian people I think have lacked the leadership that would tell them, okay, folks, in order for us to have a state, we're going to have to make compromises, and they may be painful to you, but it's for the greater good of all of us for the longer run if we go ahead and end this conflict and enter into our peaceful development. Instead, there have been a series of leaders who not just among the Palestinians, but also outside, like Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, who have tried to tell the Palestinian people, yeah, you can have it all. If you do armed resistance against the Israelis and against the West and so on, then you can have it all. We're going to wind up taking back all your land. The Jews will leave, and then it'll be a unitary Palestine with only Palestinians. So I think there are quite a lot of people in the Arab world. There are quite a lot of people among the Palestinians who know that is not possible, and that compromise and living side by side is going to be preferable to the state that they're in. But there are no leaders, I think, who are mobilizing that kind of sentiment, and they're not going to do it right now when there's an armed conflict going on and they're seeing civilian casualties in Gaza and so on. So unfortunately, I think there's been a setback for that kind of sentiment for the foreseeable future. So we're going to have to go through the crucible first. Then the dust will settle. Hopefully, it'll settle on a scene that's more favorable to our interests and Israeli interests and Arab interests, and then we can get at resolving the conflict when that time comes.
Very good. Yes, we here at AMAC, we pray for all innocent victims. We pray for the people of Palestine. We pray for the Israelis. We pray for peace above all things, that innocent people don't die. And we pray that this terrible terrorist organization can cause no future harm. And so that's what we're hoping for. I thank you so much, Joel Rayburn, Robert Nicholson. It's been an absolute, I want to say, joy to have you here with us, because you really are two very knowledgeable men who can help us digest all that's going on. And I thank you so much for your time. We so appreciate that.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Yep.
Thank you. And everybody listening out there, please be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast so more people know about AMAC's podcast, Better for America. Until next time, God bless you.